Korat Royal Thai Air Force Base, Thailand, May 6, 1966, 0600 hours, and Captain Alan T. Lamb climbed into the rear cockpit of F-100F Super Sabre serial number 581231, his radar homing equipment showing nothing but static across 3 separate frequency bands, completely unaware that 60 miles north near Hanoi, a Soviet technical advisor named Mikhail Volkov was training North Vietnamese Army crews on the Phan Song guidance radar that would try to kill him within the hour. The morning briefing had been clear: find the surface-to-air missile sites, mark them with rockets, let the F-105 Thunderchiefs destroy them. But the reality over North Vietnam would prove far more complex, far more deadly, and far more revolutionary than anyone in the United States Air Force had anticipated when they launched Project Wild Weasel 4 months earlier to counter the growing Soviet S-A-2 Guideline threat that had already shot down 37 American aircraft. July 24, 1965, airspace over Hanoi, 13,000 feet altitude, and 4 United States Air Force F-4C Phantom II aircraft from the 47th Tactical Fighter Squadron detected an unusual radar signal on their threat warning receivers, 3 beeps followed by 2 steady tones, the signature of a Soviet-built Phan Song fire control radar that none of them had encountered in combat before, and within 18 seconds, an S-A-2 Guideline surface-to-air missile traveling at Mach 3.5 slammed into the lead aircraft commanded by Captain Richard-Keirn and First Lieutenant Robert-Fobel, killing both crew members instantly and proving that North Vietnam now possessed weapons capable of destroying American air superiority. The SA-2 system represented Soviet engineering at its most effective, a 2-stage missile measuring 35 feet in length, weighing 5,040 pounds at launch, carrying a 430-pound fragmentation warhead with a lethal radius of 200 feet, guided by the Phan Song radar operating on frequencies between 2.7 and 2.9 gigahertz that American detection equipment couldn't reliably track, the warhead detonating in a fan-shaped pattern ahead of the missile's flight path to maximize probability of aircraft destruction even without direct impact. By August 1965, United States reconnaissance flights identified 5 SA-2 sites, forming a protective ring around Hanoi and Haiphong, each site configured in the distinctive 6-pointed star pattern with 6 launchers positioned at each point and the Phan Song radar van at the center, supported by spoon-rest early warning radars capable of detecting targets at 120 miles, creating an integrated air defense system more sophisticated than anything American forces had faced since the Korean War. The immediate tactical impact forced fundamental changes in American bombing operations. Aircraft that had operated freely at 15,000 to 20,000 feet to avoid anti-aircraft artillery now faced SA-2 engagement at those altitudes, while descending below 3,000 feet to evade missiles exposed crews to concentrated AAA fire from over 3,000 guns surrounding Hanoi, creating a lethal dilemma where no altitude offered safety from North Vietnamese defenses. General Joseph Moore, commander of 2nd Air Division, responsible for air operations over North Vietnam, immediately requested authorization to strike SA-2 sites before they became fully operational. But Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara denied permission, fearing that attacking installations possibly manned by Soviet advisors would escalate the conflict beyond acceptable political limits, a decision that allowed North Vietnamese forces to complete site construction and begin combat operations without interference. October 1965, Eglin Air Force Base, Florida, Building 743 in a restricted area, and Major Gary Willard assembled 10 volunteer air crews, 5 pilots and 5 electronic warfare officers, in a classified hangar to brief them on their new mission, designated Project Wild Weasel, explaining they would fly modified F-100F Super Sabre aircraft equipped with APR-35 radar homing receivers salvaged from CIA U-2 spy planes directly toward active SAM sites, locate the Fansong radar emissions, mark the targets with 2.75-inch rockets, and survive long enough for following F-105 strike aircraft to destroy the installations with bombs and cluster munitions. The volunteers understood the mathematics of their assignment. Intelligence reports indicated 17 SAM launches produced one aircraft kill in 1965, meaning every Wild Weasel sortie would face multiple missile engagements, and the F-100F lacked the speed to outrun SA-2s, traveling 3 times faster than the maximum velocity any Century Series fighter could achieve, lacked the altitude performance to climb above SA-2 engagement envelopes extending to 82,000 feet, and lacked the electronic countermeasures to confuse Fansong tracking radars operating on frequencies American jamming equipment couldn't effectively disrupt. Captain Jack Donovan, a former B-52 electronic warfare officer with over 500 hours monitoring Soviet radar signals during Strategic Air Command missions, had volunteered for the backseater position after learning that electronic warfare officers would receive flight pay equal to pilots, but upon hearing the mission briefing, reportedly responded with the phrase that would become the Wild Weasel motto: "You want me to fly in the back of a tiny little jet with a crazy fighter pilot who thinks he's invincible, home in on a SAM site in North Vietnam, and shoot it before it shoots me? You've got to be shitting me." A reaction that perfectly captured the suicidal nature of deliberately provoking enemy air defenses armed with weapons specifically designed to destroy high-performance aircraft. The modified F-100F aircraft carried specialized equipment that filled spaces normally occupied by fuel tanks and ammunition. The Vector 4 radar homing and warning system provided 360-degree coverage of S-band, C-band, and X-band radar frequencies used by early warning radars, gun directing systems, and surface-to-air missile guidance, while the IR-133 panoramic receiver displayed threat signals across a wider frequency spectrum, and the WR-300 launch warning receiver monitored the specific Fansong uplink frequencies that indicated SA-2 missiles had been fired and were in flight toward the aircraft. By November 1965, the 4 modified F-100F aircraft and their volunteer crews completed testing at Eglin Air Force Base and deployed to Korat Royal Thai Air Force Base in Thailand, arriving on Thanksgiving Day with orders to begin combat operations immediately against SAM sites that had shot down 42 American aircraft in the 4 months since SA-2s first engaged United States forces over North Vietnam. December 20, 1965, Korat Royal Thai Air Force Base, Thailand, 0430 hours, and Captain John Pitchford and Captain Robert Trier launched in F-100F, serial 581231, on the 3rd Wild Weasel combat mission, leading a strike package of 12 F-105D Thunderchiefs targeting Kep Airfield as part of Rolling Thunder 45, with orders to locate and mark SAM site VN-33 positioned 30 miles from Hanoi at coordinates 21 degrees, 20 minutes, 15 seconds north, 106 degrees, 20 minutes, 15 seconds east. 30 miles from the target, Captain Trier detected Fansong emissions on bearing 095 degrees, called SAM activity starboard side, to alert the strike package, and guided Captain Pitchford through a descending turn that used a ridgeline to break radar line of sight, then climb back until the signal strengthened, establishing through triangulation that the emission source lay approximately 12 miles ahead at low altitude, exactly where intelligence had predicted SAM site VN-33 would be positioned to defend Kep Airfield. But as Captain Pitchford pulled off the target, 100mm anti-aircraft artillery shells struck F-100F 581231 in the engine compartment, causing immediate fire warnings and hydraulic failure, forcing both crew members to eject at low altitude over heavily defended territory 30 miles from Hanoi, beginning an ordeal that would see Captain Pitchford captured and imprisoned for 7 years, while Captain Trier died in a firefight with North Vietnamese forces attempting his capture. 2 days later, December 22, 1965, Route Package 6 airspace 75 miles northwest of Hanoi, near Yen Bai, and Captain Alan Lamb, flying with Captain Jack Donovan, detected fan song emissions, descended below the radar horizon using terrain masking, climbed back until the signal strengthened, then fired 4 LAU-3 rocket pods at the source, while Captain Donovan monitored the APR-35 receiver to confirm the radar shut down permanently, marking the first successful Wild Weasel kill against a North Vietnamese SAM site, where the crew survived the engagement and returned to base. The 354th Tactical Fighter Squadron statistics after 45 days of combat operations told a brutal story. 4 F-100F aircraft deployed. Only 1 remained operational. 16 crew members flew missions. 4 were killed in action. 2 were prisoners of war. 3 were wounded by anti-aircraft fire, or SAM fragments, and 2 requested immediate removal from the program, citing psychological stress from flying missions, with over 75% casualty rates. Hanoi Air Defense Command Headquarters, January 1966, and Colonel Nguyen Van Lock reviewed after-action reports from Soviet technical advisors describing how American F-100F aircraft approached SAM sites at 400 knots, detected fan song emissions beyond 17 miles, used terrain masking to break radar lock, then marked targets with white phosphorus rockets before F-105 Thunderchiefs delivered cluster munitions. Patterns that revealed American tactics could be countered through radar discipline, site mobility, and coordinated engagement procedures. Soviet advisor teams, numbering over 4,000 personnel by mid-1965, according to declassified Central Intelligence Agency estimates, trained North Vietnamese crews to operate the S-A-2 system's complex liquid fuel rockets, fan song guidance radars, spoon rest acquisition radars, and command infrastructure, emphasizing the importance of emissions control, keeping radars silent until target acquisition guaranteed, firing missiles in salvos of 3 to 5 weapons to saturate American electronic countermeasures, then immediately shutting down and relocating before Wild Weasel aircraft could execute retaliatory strikes. Senior Lieutenant Nguyen Van Fiat, who would eventually command SAM Site VN 549 and claim 21 aircraft kills during the war, later described in interviews how Soviet advisors emphasized discipline over aggression. They taught us that radar was like a flashlight in darkness. It allowed us to see the enemy, but also revealed our position, so we learned to use it in short bursts, acquire targets quickly, fire missiles, then shut down and move before American Wild Weasel aircraft could destroy us with their radar-seeking missiles. The North Vietnamese adapted quickly, establishing procedures where multiple fan song radars would track targets passively using data from spoon rest early warning systems operating on different frequencies that Wild Weasel equipment couldn't reliably detect, activating guidance radars only during the final 30 seconds before missile launch, denying Wild Weasel crews the extended radar emissions they needed to pinpoint exact locations, and forcing American aircraft to remain over defended areas longer while exposing them to coordinated SAM and anti-aircraft artillery engagements. The deception extended beyond radar discipline to physical site construction. North Vietnamese engineers built decoy SAM sites using white-painted bamboo poles cut to exactly 35 feet length to simulate SA-2 missiles on aerial reconnaissance photographs, arranged in the characteristic six-pointed star pattern around mock-up radar vans, surrounded by active anti-aircraft artillery batteries positioned to destroy Wild Weasel aircraft investigating the false targets, a stratagem that accounted for 6 F-105F losses between August and October 1966. Korat Royal Thai Air Force Base, May 1966, and the first 11 F-105F, Thunderchief Wild Weasel 3 aircraft arrived from modification facilities at Republic Aviation, equipped with more sophisticated APR-25 and APR-26 radar homing receivers, providing better sensitivity and frequency coverage, ER-142 panoramic threat displays showing all detected radars simultaneously, AGM-45 Shrike anti-radiation missiles with 18-mile range and passive radar seekers, and sufficient speed, Mach 2 capability at altitude, to survive in the heavily defended airspace around Hanoi, where F-100F aircraft could no longer operate effectively. The AGM-45 Shrike missile represented Naval Weapons Center engineering, adapted from the AIM-7 Sparrow air-to-air weapon, replacing the active radar seeker with a passive receiver tuned to specific fan-song frequencies in the 2.7 to 2.9 GHz range, using the same rocket motor producing Mach 2 velocity, carrying a 66-pound blast fragmentation warhead designed to destroy radar antennas and disable guidance vans through shrapnel effects, with a circular error probability of 65 feet, meaning 50% of missiles would impact within 65 feet of the radar antenna if the target remained emitting throughout missile flight. Technical limitations plagued early Shrike employment. Each missile required pre-flight tuning to specific fan-song frequency bands because the seeker couldn't adapt to different radar types, forcing crews to carry multiple missiles with different seeker heads and select appropriate weapons based on threat displays during combat. The seeker had a fixed field of view requiring near-perfect aircraft alignment toward the target before launch. And most critically, the missile lost tracking if fan-song radars shut down during flight, causing Shrikes to ballistic toward the last known emission source with drastically reduced accuracy. By July 1966, 11 F-105F Wild Weasel aircraft operated over North Vietnam flying Iron Hand missions, the official designation for SAM suppression operations. But within 6 weeks, 5 were destroyed by S-A-2 missiles and anti-aircraft artillery, demonstrating that, even with improved equipment and tactics, the mission remained extraordinarily dangerous because Wild Weasel crews flew first-in, last-out profiles that required arriving in target areas 15 minutes before strike packages to suppress SAM sites, maintaining coverage while bombers delivered ordnance, then departing last to ensure air defenses remained suppressed. Major Leo Thorsness, commanding Wild Weasel operations at Tockley Royal Thai Air Force Base, described the tactical reality in debriefings that were later declassified. We would go in high enough to let somebody shoot at us and low enough to go down and get them, using ourselves as bait to draw SAM launches, then attacking the sites with Shrike missiles or bombs while they were committed to engaging us, all while MiG fighters and AAA tried to kill us, knowing that if we didn't suppress those SAMs, the strike force following us would get massacred. Gia Lam Air Base near Hanoi, August 1966, and Soviet technical advisor Captain Yuri Dmitriev observed North Vietnamese radar operators practicing blink procedures, activating fan-song guidance radar for 8-second bursts to acquire targets and generate initial missile guidance, immediately shutting down before Shrike missiles traveling at Mach 2 could cover the 18 miles from minimum launch range, then reactivating from different positions to provide mid-course guidance updates to SA-2s already in flight, tactics that reduced Shrike effectiveness from 40% kill probability to 25% within 3 months. Senior Lieutenant Fiat described the psychological pressure of these engagements. Soviet advisors showed us how to recognize Wild Weasel aircraft by their approach patterns, flying directly toward our sights at medium altitude instead of high altitude like bombers, and they taught us to shut down radar the instant we saw those profiles, count to 45 while our missile was in flight, then reactivate briefly to provide terminal guidance, all while knowing that if we kept radar on too long, a Shrike missile would kill us. But if we shut down too soon, our SA-2 would miss, and American bombers would destroy targets we were supposed to protect. Soviet technical advisors introduced additional countermeasures, including fan-song radar frequency agility, rapidly shifting transmission frequency across the 2.7 to 2.9 GHz band to break Shrike tracking that required constant frequency for guidance, though this technique degraded S-A-2 missile accuracy because guidance signals became less precise, forcing operators to choose between protecting themselves from Shrikes or maintaining optimal missile performance. North Vietnamese missile crews, trained by Soviet advisors at facilities near Moscow, where they practiced against simulated American jamming and anti-radiation missiles, learned to exploit American tactical patterns that revealed Wild Weasel operations. Flights typically consisted of 4 aircraft in hunter-killer teams, 2 F-105F Wild Weasels carrying Shrike missiles, and 2 F-105D strike aircraft loaded with cluster bombs, smaller formations than standard strike packages of 16 to 20 aircraft, allowing radar operators to identify suppression missions and implement counter-tactics. Tockley Royal Thai Air Force Base, November 1966, and F-105G Wild Weasel aircraft began arriving equipped with ANALQ-105 electronic countermeasures pods permanently mounted in ventral blisters under the fuselage, improved APR-36 and APR-37 radar homing receivers capable of detecting fan-song emissions at extended ranges beyond 70 miles, and AGM-78 standard anti-radiation missiles with 60-mile range, Mach 2.5 speed, 200-pound warheads, and most importantly, inertial guidance systems that maintained track toward last known target location even after radar shutdown. The AGM-78 standard ARM represented a quantum leap in suppression capability, developed by General Dynamics from the RIM-66 standard surface-to-air missile used by the United States Navy. The weapon could be launched from altitudes above 30,000 feet and distances exceeding 50 miles, featured a broadband seeker that could engage multiple radar types without pre-flight tuning, included an autopilot that could guide the missile through pre-programmed flight paths, allowing launches up to 180 degrees off the target bearing, and carried explosive power sufficient to eliminate not just fan-song guidance vans, but also associated command vehicles, generator trucks, and missile launchers. The inertial guidance capability proved most revolutionary. Once the seeker locked onto fan-song emissions, an onboard computer calculated target position and stored those coordinates, continuing to guide the missile toward that location even if the radar shut down, with accuracy degrading from 65 feet circular error probability to approximately 300 feet when relying on inertial guidance alone, still sufficient to destroy radar vans and damage nearby equipment through 200-pound warhead effects. By December 1966, the typical F-105G Wild Weasel load consisted of 2 AGM-78 standard missiles on inboard pylons for high-value targets at extended range, 2 AGM-45 Shrike, missiles on outboard pylons for close-range suppression, 1 SUU-23 20mm gun pod with 1,200 rounds for strafing damaged sites, and 1 650-gallon centerline fuel tank to provide endurance for 3.5-hour missions. Route Package 6 Airspace, 1967, and the statistical reality of Wild Weasel operations became brutally clear. North Vietnamese forces fired 3,202 S-A-2 missiles during the year, achieving 56 confirmed kills against American aircraft, including F-105s, F-4s, RF-4C reconnaissance jets, and 3 B-52 Stratofortress bombers, a kill rate of 1 aircraft destroyed per 57 missiles launched, while United States Air Force Wild Weasel crews flew over 2,300 sorties, lost 33 F-105 aircraft to SAMs and anti-aircraft artillery, representing 1.43% loss rate per sortie. The North Vietnamese maintained approximately 100 SA-2 sites in operational status throughout 1967, according to both American intelligence estimates and post-war Vietnamese publications, with 75 clustered around Hanoi and Haiphong, forming what Joint Chiefs of Staff briefings described as the most heavily defended airspace in military history, supported by over 7,000 anti-aircraft artillery pieces ranging from 23mm Zu-23 automatic cannons to 130mm KS-30 heavy guns. Wild Weasel crews developed increasingly sophisticated tactics, hunter-killer teams where F-105G aircraft carrying Shrike and Standard missiles worked in integrated packages, with F-4E Phantom II fighters loaded with CBU-24 cluster bombs, electronic warfare EB-66 destroyer aircraft providing standoff jamming from positions 30 miles from target areas, F-4D fighters dispensing radar-disrupting chaff corridors 5 miles wide and 60 miles long, and HH-3E Jolly Green Giant rescue helicopters maintaining combat air patrol stations. Major Leo Thorsness executed one of the most celebrated Wild Weasel missions on April 19, 1967, when his F-105F was hit by anti-aircraft fire while suppressing SAM sites near Hanoi, forcing him to fly on backup hydraulic systems while continuing to engage air defenses, shooting down a MiG-17 with 20mm cannon fire, destroying 2 SAM sites with Shrike missiles, and coordinating rescue helicopter operations, actions that earned the Medal of Honor. The enemy perspective revealed equally grim statistics. North Vietnamese SAM crews suffered approximately 600 casualties in 1967, including 320 killed in action, primarily from Wild Weasel Shrike and Standard missile strikes, lost 47 Fansong radar vans destroyed beyond repair, representing $47 million in Soviet-supplied equipment. Senior Lieutenant Fiat's personal account quantified the crew experience. In 1967, my battalion launched 89 SA-2 missiles at American aircraft, claimed 21 confirmed kills, including 4 B-52 bombers, but we lost 3 Fansong radar vans to Wild Weasel Shrike missiles, had 6 crew members killed by those missiles, 12 wounded by cluster bombs, and were forced to relocate our site 43 times to avoid destruction. Tockley Royal Thai Air Force Base, March 1967, and Captain Mike Gilroy, electronic warfare officer flying F-105F Wild Weasel missions, described the peculiar terror of deliberately provoking SAM launches. You're flying toward the most heavily defended real estate on Earth. Your equipment is screaming that multiple radars are tracking you. You know they're about to shoot. And instead of running away like every fiber of your being is telling you to do, you turn directly toward the threat, light your afterburner, and accelerate to give them the best possible radar return. Captain Ed Rock, transitioning from F-100F to F-105F Wild Weasel in July 1966, recalled his first mission over Route Package 6. I had flown F-100s for years, thought I understood air defense suppression, but nothing prepared me for the reality of watching my threat warning receiver light up like a Christmas tree with 15 different radars, all trying to kill me simultaneously, hearing missile launch calls from my backseater, seeing the actual SA-2 coming up through the clouds trailing white smoke. Nguyen Van Kien, trained as a Fansong radar operator in 1965, described the moral conflict of his mission. Soviet advisors told us we were defending our homeland against American imperialism, which we believed completely. But every time I activated the radar, I knew an American Wild Weasel was probably detecting my signal and firing a Shrike missile that would impact our position in less than 1 minute, killing me and my comrades, and I was only 22 years old. Anderson Air Force Base, Guam, December 18, 1972, 0400 hours, and 129 B-52 Stratofortress bombers began launching at 1-minute intervals for Operation Linebacker 2, the largest strategic bombing campaign since World War II, supported by 28 F-105G Wild Weasel aircraft from the 17th and 561st Tactical Fighter Squadrons, tasked with suppressing the 36 SA-2 battalions defending Hanoi. The North Vietnamese Air Defense Command, commanded by General Tran Van Dong with Soviet advisor oversight, deployed over 200 SA-2 launchers in concentric rings around priority targets, supported by Fansong radars netted to spoon rest early warning systems coordinated through landline communications that denied American electronic intelligence prepared to engage B-52 formations with saturating missile salvos. Wild Weasel crews flying F-105G aircraft armed with AGM-45 Shrike and AGM-78 standard anti-radiation missiles preceded each bomber wave by 15 minutes, detected Fansong emissions at ranges exceeding 60 miles, fired missiles at maximum standoff distances to force radar shutdown, then closed to attack positions where they could engage any site that reactivated to guide SA-2s toward the B-52 streams. The first night's results proved sobering. 3 B-52s shot down by SA-2 missiles despite Wild Weasel support, demonstrating that even with suppression, predictable bomber tactics against a sophisticated enemy produced casualties, though the losses represented less than 3% of attacking aircraft, well below the 10 to 15% Strategic Air Command planners had feared. North Vietnamese crews described their perspective. Senior Lieutenant Fiat commanded a SAM battalion that launched 14 missiles during the first night. We knew the American B-52s were coming because we could hear them on radar from 100 miles away. Soviet advisors had taught us to ignore the Wild Weasel aircraft, trying to suppress us and focus on bombers. Wait until they were committed to their target runs, then launch everything we had. Hanoi airspace, December 20th, 1972, 2100 hours, and 6 B-52 Stratofortress bombers fell to SA-2 missiles in the single deadliest night of Operation Linebacker 2, struck during post-target turns that exposed their largest radar cross-sections to Fansong guidance beams, proving that even with Wild Weasel support, predictable tactics against a sophisticated enemy produced catastrophic results. Soviet advisors and North Vietnamese crews had studied B-52 electronic warfare patterns during Linebacker 1 operations from May through October 1972, identified the post-strike turn as the moment of maximum vulnerability when aircraft decelerated into headwinds and pointed jamming antennas away from tracking radars, then positioned SAM batteries specifically to exploit this tactical weakness. Wild Weasel crews reported the disaster in shock debriefings. Major Bill Sparks described watching a B-52 take a direct hit. I had just fired a standard at a Fansong site near their target when I saw the fireball, a B-52 just disintegrating in midair, pieces falling through the clouds trailing fire, knowing 8 guys were dead or about to be prisoners. Strategic Air Command responded within hours. Subsequent B-52 missions varied approach routes from 12 different directions instead of 3. Staggered arrival times to prevent radar operators from predicting attack sequences, randomized post-target maneuvers using pre-briefed turn points selected during flight rather than fixed patterns, and compressed attack windows to overwhelm defenders with simultaneous engagements. The Wild Weasel force doubled, from 8 F-105G aircraft per bomber wave to 16, providing redundant coverage that ensured if one suppression aircraft was shot down or forced to abort, others could fill the gap. Tactics that increased suppression effectiveness, but also increased Wild Weasel crew exposure. The tactical changes produced immediate results. On December 26th, 120 B-52s struck Hanoi with only 1 loss. Despite North Vietnamese forces firing 120 SA-2 missiles, a kill rate of less than 1% compared to the 2.4% loss rate on December 20th. Korat Royal Thai Air Force Base, December 29, 1972, and the last F-105G Wild Weasel aircraft returned from Operation Linebacker 2 having fired over 200 AGM-45 Shrike and AGM-78 standard anti-radiation missiles during 11 days of combat, destroyed or damaged 78% of operational SAM sites around Hanoi, enabled B-52 bombers to drop 15,000 tons of ordnance on North Vietnamese military infrastructure with final loss rates below 2%. The statistical evidence proved overwhelming. North Vietnamese forces fired 1,240 SA-2 missiles during Linebacker 2, achieving 15 confirmed kills against B-52s and 2 against other aircraft, requiring 81 missile launches per kill compared to 15 missiles per kill in 1965, a degradation of effectiveness directly attributable to Wild Weasel suppression operations. Soviet advisor reports transmitted to Moscow acknowledged the decisive impact of American anti-radiation missiles and Wild Weasel tactics. Major Volkov's final assessment in January 1973 noted that North Vietnamese air defense forces, despite possessing sophisticated SA-2 systems, experienced crews, and favorable defensive positions, could not sustain operations under concentrated suppression attacks. Wild Weasel losses during Linebacker 2 remained classified for years. 2 F-105G aircraft destroyed by SA-2 missiles, 1 damaged by anti-aircraft fire and crashed on landing, 4 crew members killed in action, 2 captured as prisoners of war, demonstrating that even at the campaign's end, the mission remained extraordinarily dangerous. Paris, France, January 27, 1973. And negotiators signed the Paris Peace Accords ending American military involvement in Vietnam, an agreement reached partly because Operation Linebacker 2 demonstrated United States Air Force capability to destroy North Vietnamese infrastructure despite sophisticated Soviet-supplied air defenses, a capability that would have been impossible without Wild Weasel suppression operations that neutralized over 80% of SAM threats around Hanoi. The Wild Weasel program revolutionized suppression of enemy air defenses doctrine. From initial F-100F operations in 1965 through final F-105G missions in 1972, American crews proved that dedicated aircraft employing anti-radiation missiles could systematically destroy or neutralize surface-to-air missile systems, establishing tactical principles that influenced F-4G Wild Weasel, for development, EA-6B Prowler electronic attack missions, and eventually F-16C Wild Weasel operations. Final statistics revealed the program's cost and effectiveness. The United States Air Force lost 46 F-105 Wild Weasel aircraft and 2 F-100F Super Sabres to enemy action between 1965 and 1972, suffered over 200 crew casualties, including deaths and captures, but enabled thousands of strike aircraft to complete missions that otherwise would have been impossible against North Vietnamese air defenses. Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, 2024, and Wild Weasel tactics developed over Vietnam continue influencing suppression of enemy air defenses operations. The fundamental principle that dedicated aircraft must deliberately expose themselves to enemy radar, locate emission sources, and destroy them with anti-radiation missiles remains unchanged despite advances in stealth technology, electronic warfare capabilities, and precision-guided munitions. The North Vietnamese experience proved equally instructive. Even sophisticated Soviet S-A-2 systems operated by well-trained crews with advisor support could not prevent determined suppression attacks, demonstrating that static air defenses without offensive counter-air capability ultimately fail against opponents willing to accept losses to achieve air superiority, a lesson confirmed in subsequent conflicts from Desert Storm in 1991 to Allied Force in 1999. Wild Weasel operations established the template for modern SEAD integration of electronic warfare aircraft, anti-radiation missiles, fighter escorts, and strike platforms working in coordinated packages to systematically dismantle enemy air defenses, tactics that owe their genesis to those first F-100F crews who flew into Fansong radar coverage, knowing that survival depended on locating and destroying the very systems trying to kill them. Arlington National Cemetery, Virginia, and simple white headstones mark the graves of Wild Weasel air crews who didn't return from North Vietnam. Men like Captain Robert-Keirn, who died evading capture after being shot down December 20th, 1965. Major Roosevelt Hessel and Captain Charles Morgan killed when their F-105F struck a mountain after taking anti-aircraft fire July 6, 1966, and dozens of others whose sacrifice enabled American air operations throughout the war. In the final analysis, Wild Weasel operations and Shrike missile employment decisively influenced the air war over Vietnam, demonstrating that technological innovation combined with tactical courage could overcome even the most sophisticated air defenses, a legacy that continues shaping how modern air forces approach the suppression mission that remains among the most dangerous in military aviation.